All right, let's dive into one of the most fundamental and fiercely contested parts of being human, desire. You know, for as long as we've had societies, we've wrestled with sexuality. And that story, well, it's way more dramatic and influential than you might think.
It really makes you wonder, right? How can something so natural, so basic to our biology, get so complicated? It feels like it should be simple, but history tells a totally different story. It's a story about a constant, powerful struggle over this deeply personal part of ourselves.
See, on one side of this battle, you've got these massive forces of control. For thousands of years, societies, religions, and governments have tried to regulate, to channel, and to restrict human desire.
But pushing back against that, always, is the drive for liberation. This is that constant human quest for sexual freedom, for understanding, and for the right to define desire on our own terms. These two forces, control and liberation, are really the engine of our entire story.
Now, a major tool of control has always been the concept of sin. Major religions created these powerful moral frameworks that didn't just govern your actions. They shaped your inner thoughts, defining certain sexual acts as, a transgression against divine law.
And the counterforce to sin? Well, a lot of the time, it's been science. From ancient texts to modern labs, the whole idea behind sexology has been not to condemn, but to explain, to actually understand the mechanics and all the different varieties of human sexuality. So that's our battleground: control versus liberation, sin versus science.
So first up, let's talk about these systems of control. How exactly did societies build the structures that governed who we could love and how we could love them?
Okay, this right here captures a seismic shift in thinking. I mean, look at the Roman Empire. For them, masculinity, or virtues, was all about social dominance. As long as a Roman citizen was the active, penetrating partner, sex with pretty much anyone of a lower status was acceptable. But early Christianity didn't just change the rules, it completely flipped the script. All of a sudden, the highest virtue wasn't dominance, it was chastity. Sex was locked down to just within marriage, and acts that were once totally commonplace became sins. This wasn't just a small change, it was a revolution in Western morality.
And this new morality didn't just stay in the realm of ideas, it was systematically turned into law. So it started with this cultural repulsion, right? Early Christians basically defined themselves against what they saw as Roman depravity. Then, as their influence grew, that turned into prohibition. Emperors started outlawing all those practices. And the final step? Codification. The Code of Justinian basically baked these religious ethics into the legal foundation of the empire, and that created a system of control that would dominate the West for over 1,000 years. But while religion and law were busy building these structures of control, another way of thinking was slowly bubbling up, this really radical idea that sex could be scientifically studied.
And man, this was a long and difficult road. You see these early attempts in texts like the Kama Sutra, which literally treated sex as a science. Centuries later, you have Enlightenment thinkers arguing that pleasure is its own justification. But the real breakthrough came in 1919 Berlin with Magnus Hirschfeld's Institute for Sexual Science. It was the first of its kind in the world, but its end was violent and swift. And that's a pretty stark reminder of just how threatening this knowledge was to the powers that be.
I mean, the Institute's motto says it all: through science to justice. For Hirschfeld, understanding sexuality wasn't just some academic exercise. He saw it as a direct path to human rights. His institute built this unparalleled library, fought for LGBTQ+ rights, and even issued official documents, transvestite passes, to protect gender nonconforming people from police harassment. For a brief, brilliant moment in Weimar Germany, it was this incredible sanctuary of reason.
And then, it was gone. In May 1933, Nazi-led student groups stormed the institute. They dragged its entire library, tens of thousands of books, journals, absolutely irreplaceable research, into the streets and burned it all. This quote just captures the moment perfectly. What was celebrated as a purification in Germany was seen as a horrifying act of barbarism by the rest of the world. The science of sex was literally driven underground.
But that fire couldn't extinguish the idea. And just a few decades later, the forces of liberation didn't just bubble under the surface, they exploded into the mainstream. This was the sexual revolution.
So what exactly was it? Well, in a nutshell, it was this period where the old rules, the ones that were basically codified back in the Roman Empire, were openly challenged and, for a lot of people, just thrown out.
The idea that sex was only for making babies within a heterosexual marriage was suddenly and very publicly up for debate.
So, 3 huge things made this happen. First, technology. The pills separated sex from procreation in a way that was simple and reliable for the first time ever. Second, science. The Kinsey Reports were like a cultural earthquake. They revealed that what society was preaching was wildly different from what people were actually doing in private. And third, culture. You had feminism, the hippies, and the end of literary censorship, creating this whole new environment where these ideas could just flourish.
Just think about this number from Kinsey for a second. 39%. In an era where homosexuality was officially classified as a mental illness and a crime, this single data point was an absolute bombshell. It proved that human sexuality was way more diverse than the rigid moral codes of the time would ever admit. Science was holding up a mirror, and for a lot of people, the reflection was pretty shocking.
But here's the thing, this revolution didn't look the same everywhere. While the pill was this huge driver in the West, in a country like Japan, things like fear of AIDS and specific government policies led to a totally different path. I mean, as late as 2004, condoms still accounted for 80% of birth control use there. It's a great example of how culture shapes even the tools of liberation.
Which, of course, brings us to today. The revolution happened, but what did we inherit? Was it some simple utopia of sexual freedom? Not quite. It's more like we're living in a modern maze.
You know, we have freedoms and tools for exploration our ancestors couldn't even dream of, thanks in large part to the internet. But that same technology, along with all the media and advertising, it creates all these new pressures, bombarding us with unrealistic ideals and pretty much monetizing our insecurities. And some of the old ghosts, like the stigma around sexually transmitted infections, they're still very much with us.
This number is just staggering. Over 1 million new STIs are acquired every single day. It's a really stark reminder that for all of our progress in social acceptance and scientific understanding, the biological realities of sex are still a massive public health challenge.
So, I think the key takeaway here is this, that ancient conflict between control and liberation, between sin and science, it hasn't ended. Not at all. It has simply changed shape. The battle isn't just confined to churches and courtrooms anymore. Now it's fought on our screens, in our media, and honestly, inside our own heads.
And that leaves us with the big question. We are all living through the next chapter of this story, right now. So, what's going to define it? What are the new forces of control and the new forms of liberation that are emerging as we speak?